Marcus, a man whose life revolved around the silence of archives and the crisp rustle of ancient paper, found his meticulously ordered existence abruptly fractured. For years, his small, book-lined flat had been his sanctuary, a bulwark against the chaotic clamor of the outside world. He was a historian, a meticulous untangler of forgotten timelines, and his reclusive nature suited his profession perfectly. His days were spent deciphering fading script, his evenings immersed in dense biographies, the quiet hum of his laptop the only consistent sound. He preferred the company of deceased authors to living ones, finding their narratives less prone to the erratic whims of emotion. The summons arrived not as a dramatic telegram, but as a stiff, cream-colored envelope bearing an unfamiliar crest. Inside, a letter from the solicitor informed him, with a detached formality, of the passing of a distant great-aunt, a woman Marcus remembered only as a faded photograph on his grandmother's mantelpiece. The letter concluded with a startling revelation. Marcus was the sole inheritor of Blackwood Manor. He reread the words, the name of the estate echoing in his mind with an unfamiliar chill. Blackwood Manor. Marcus, a man of empirical evidence and documented fact, had scoffed internally. Superstition was the residue of ignorance, easily dispelled by the sharp light of reason. He was determined to approach this inheritance with the same objective scrutiny he applied to a disputed historical document. The manor, he reasoned, was merely an old house, perhaps in need of significant repair, not a repository of specters. The journey to Blackwood Manor was a gradual shedding of civilization. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a deeply rutted track that snaked through skeletal trees. The driver, a taciturn man whose face was etched with the landscape's harshness, offered no conversation, merely an occasional glance in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. Marcus watched the familiar world recede, replaced by a brooding expanse of moorland and leafless woods. He felt a peculiar tightening in his chest, an unfamiliar tension that he attributed to the sheer isolation, the abrupt severance from his accustomed urban hum. Then, through a gap in the gnarled oaks, it appeared. It was not merely large, it was immense, a sprawling Gothic edifice of blackened stone that seemed to absorb the meager light of the afternoon. A sense of profound age clung to it, a weight that seemed to bend the very air around it. The drive, choked with weeds, led to massive wrought iron gates, rusted shut and draped with ivy. The driver had to manually unlatch them, the groan of metal echoing unnaturally in the stillness. As they drew closer, Marcus observed the details. Flaking paint on the window frames, missing slates on the roof, the intricate, almost grotesque carvings around the main entrance obscured by lichen. A pervasive dampness permeated the air, a scent of decaying wood and stagnant earth. To the east, beyond a stand of skeletal birches, he could discern the flat gray expanse of a frozen lake, its surface reflecting the dismal sky like tarnished silver. It added to the desolation, a stark, silent witness to the manor's enduring isolation. The driver deposited Marcus's single suitcase on the grand, crumbling steps and swiftly departed, the crunch of his tires on the gravel road fading quickly, leaving Marcus utterly alone. Marcus pushed open the massive oak door. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light filtering through the grimy fanlight above. His footsteps echoed loudly on the checkered marble floor of the entrance hall, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the vast, cavernous space. It was magnificent, in a decaying, formidable way. But it was also unsettling. It was just a draft, he told himself, or the natural unease of entering a long-abandoned dwelling. He was determined to remain rational. This was merely a large, old house. He would find the facts. The manor loomed, a hulking silhouette against the slate-gray sky. Marcus surveyed the main study, a vast chamber that smelled of dust, damp stone, and something metallic, like old iron left in the rain. This was where his work would begin. His determination, a rigid internal scaffolding, held firm against the house's oppressive silence. He directed the two movers, stoic men who avoided his gaze, to place his numerous crates of books and archival boxes along the far wall. Each crate was meticulously labeled Roman era, medieval feudalism, early modern Europe, and, most importantly, local history, unsorted. The latter contained the bulk of his recent acquisitions, the primary sources he hoped would illuminate the manor's true past, stripping away the layers of local embellishment. As the movers departed, their truck's engine a fading growl down the long gravel drive, Marcus felt the silence deepen. It was not merely an absence of sound, but a palpable presence, thick and heavy. He began methodically unpacking, his movements precise. Books, each a familiar weight, found temporary homes on a large, scarred oak desk. He arranged his research notes, his spectacles, his fountain pen, creating an island of order amidst the room's disarray. A sudden, sharp drop in temperature made him pause. He shivered, rubbing his arms. A draft, he concluded, the inevitable consequence of an aging structure. He made a mental note to inspect the window seals later. He had placed it, he was certain, by the fireplace. Yet, it was not there. His brow furrowed. He scanned the room, his gaze meticulous. It sat instead by the opposite wall, tucked beside a towering, empty bookshelf. He remembered explicitly moving it away from that spot, fearing the damp stone. A flicker of annoyance, not unease, touched him. He must have been more distracted than he realized. He grunted, hoisted the heavy box, and returned it to its intended location. He worked late into the night, fueled by lukewarm tea from a thermos. The manor groaned around him, a symphony of creaks and subtle shifts in the ancient timber. He cataloged these sounds, the settling of foundations, the expansion and contraction of wood, the wind whistling through unseen gaps. Rational explanations for a rational man. He paused, his pen hovering over a page. He strained his ears. Nothing. Only the steady tick of his wristwatch. He attributed it to the wind, perhaps echoing through a neglected chimney flue. The house was old, after all, and prone to such sonic peculiarities. He resumed his work, his focus unwavering. Days bled into a week. Marcus established a routine. Mornings were for unpacking and organizing, afternoons for initial readings, evenings for synthesizing. The manor remained largely silent, save for its usual chorus of structural complaints. Yet, the subtle phenomena persisted. His spectacles, left on his desk, would sometimes migrate to a nearby side table. A specific volume, an account of the Penhaligon lineage, which he had placed spine out on a shelf, would be found face down, its pages slightly fanned, as if recently handled. Each time, he formulated a logical explanation. His own absent-mindedness, the house settling, the slight vibration of a distant vehicle. One blustery afternoon, while attempting to secure a particularly stubborn shutter that rattled incessantly, Marcus found himself in a seldom-used corridor. His hand brushed against a loose panel in the wainscoting. With a small click, it gave way, revealing a narrow, hidden cavity. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and fine dust, were several leather-bound journals, their covers cracked and brittle with age. His pulse quickened, a purely academic excitement. These were not listed in the inventory, primary sources untouched. He carefully extracted them, their weight surprisingly substantial. Back in the study, under the focused beam of his desk lamp, he opened the first. The script was an elegant, faded copperplate. The entries were dated from the late 17th century. The initial entries were mundane, weather observations, household accounts, local gossip. Then, the tone shifted. August 14th, 1687, it presses upon the mind. Coincidence. He turned a page. The writing became more erratic, the ink smudged in places. September 3rd, 1687. Martha claims her dolls rearranged themselves. Marcus found the study door ajar, though Marcus bolted it myself. The old woman in the village spoke of the hungry house. Superstition. Yet the sense of being watched. It festers. Marcus felt a prickle of unease. He dismissed the hungry house as local legend, a common embellishment. But the feeling of being watched? He'd felt it himself, a vague sense of scrutiny he'd attributed to the unfamiliarity of the place. He flipped to a later entry, the handwriting almost frantic. October 21st, 1687. The ice on the frozen lake grows thicker, mirroring the ice within these walls. My memory falters. Where did Marcus leave the keys? My wife's face. It recedes. The house takes. It takes pieces of us. It hears. It sees. It hungers. The mention of the frozen lake struck him. He'd seen it from an upper window, a vast, flat expanse of white, unnervingly still. The journal entry, however, was not a mere observation. It was a desperate plea, a confession. Marcus closed the journal, the leather cool against his fingertips. His rational mind struggled to reconcile the increasingly agitated entries with his skeptical framework. The previous owner had clearly suffered some form of psychological decline, perhaps exacerbated by the isolation. He told himself it was simply confirmation bias, a natural human tendency to seek patterns. The journal lay closed on the worn oak desk, its leather cover cool beneath Marcus's fingertips. The mention of a rat, scrawled with such desperate emphasis, snagged at his thoughts. Was it a pet, a laboratory specimen, or a metaphor for something gnawing at the writer's sanity? He couldn't be sure. The manor creaked around him, a symphony of settling timber and groaning pipes, each sound amplified in the vast silence. He pushed the journal aside, the unanswered question a dull ache behind his eyes. He spent the next few days immersed in the manor's history, a self-imposed task that felt less like research and more like an archaeological dig into decay. The library, a cavernous room smelling of dust and dried ink, held a treasure trove of forgotten documents. Ledgers, property deeds, personal correspondence, and the occasional unsettling diary. As he sifted through brittle pages, a new layer of unease began to settle over him, thin and pervasive as the dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light. It started subtly, a whisper, indistinct and fleeting, just at the edge of his hearing. He would pause, pen hovering over paper, straining to catch the sound, but it would always vanish, leaving only the usual house noises. A gust of wind rattling a distant window, the groan of old floorboards in an empty hallway. He attributed it to fatigue, the strain of deciphering faded script, or the sheer age of the structure playing tricks on his ears. He'd glance up from a document, convinced he'd seen movement, only to find the corridor empty, the heavy velvet drapes unmoving. Once, while ascending the main staircase, a form seemed to detach itself from the gloom at the landing above, a vaguely human silhouette that dissolved into the wall as his gaze sharpened. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, dismissing it as an optical illusion, a trick of the flickering gaslight he now used in the evenings. His skepticism was a shield, but it felt increasingly thin. Nightmares clawed at him, vivid and suffocating. He woke drenched in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs, the taste of ash in his mouth. Driven by a growing, unsettling curiosity, Marcus began to focus his research on the previous inhabitants. The manor had a long, unbroken lineage, documented through generations of ownership. He cross-referenced names, dates, and local newspaper clippings. The first instance he found was a woman from the late 17th century, Lady Eleanor. Her journal, written in elegant, spidery script, began as a chronicle of her daily life and anxieties. Over the years, however, her entries grew increasingly erratic. She wrote of the voices in the stone, of the shifting patterns in the plaster, and eventually of her own mind unraveling like a loose thread. The final entry was a series of frantic, illegible scribbles, ending abruptly. a few generations later, a master of the house, a respected scholar named Lord Alistair, reportedly vanished without a trace in the early 19th century. The official report declared him lost at sea, despite his known aversion to maritime travel, and the fact his study, still filled with his half-finished manuscripts, showed no sign of a hurried departure. Marcus found a hidden compartment in a desk, revealing a series of letters from Alistair to a colleague, detailing his growing conviction that the house itself was a living, malevolent entity, and that it was feeding on the quiet. The letters ceased abruptly, mid-sentence, weeks before his disappearance. Then there was the series of suicides. A young artist in the 1880s, driven to hang himself in the East Tower, leaving behind canvases filled with swirling, nightmarish patterns that seemed to depict the very walls of the manor twisting and screaming. Marcus sat back, the weight of the discoveries pressing down on him. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a progression. Unease, delusion, madness, disappearance, suicide. All linked, not by bloodline or external tragedy, but by the shared experience of dwelling within this house. His initial skepticism, once a sturdy edifice, now felt like a crumbling facade. They were echoes of those who had come before, trapped, consumed. He looked around the library, the tall bookshelves reaching towards the ceiling like skeletal fingers. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken narratives. And he, Marcus, was simply the next entry in its long, morbid ledger. He couldn't be sure, but the possibility of the latter sat uncomfortably in his mind, a cold seed of unease. He, a historian of repute, dealt in verifiable facts, in documented narratives. These journals, with their increasingly disjointed entries, were blurring the lines of his carefully constructed academic world. That night, the lines blurred further. He had retired to the master bedroom, the heavy drapes drawn against the oppressive darkness outside. Sleep, however, refused to come. He lay on his back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, when the room shifted. Not physically, but perceptually. He was humming a low, mournful tune. Marcus blinked, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath. The woman was not a ghost, not spectral. She possessed a tangible, albeit translucent quality, as if she were a memory projected onto the very air. He could discern the weave of her fabric, the slight tremor in her hand as she reached out to touch the glass. A faint scent of dried lavender and something metallic, like old iron, permeated the air. He tried to speak, to call out, but his throat felt constricted, his voice trapped. He sat bolt upright, heart thrumming against his ribs. His hand instinctively reached for the bedside lamp, flicking it on. The room was empty, the air still, save for the lingering ghostly fragrance. Yet the vividness, the sensory assault, defied easy dismissal. The visions escalated. They came not only at night, but in the broad light of day, fleeting glimpses that lasted only seconds but left an indelible mark. While researching in the library, he saw a group of stern-faced men in archaic clothing arguing vehemently in the very corner where the tall grandfather clock stood. Their voices were a low, indistinct murmur, a pressure in his ears, and the air around them shimmered with a palpable tension before they dissolved. Later, in the long, drafty corridor leading to the servants' quarters, he walked through a fleeting image of a child, no older than 5, clutching a wooden doll, her small face streaked with tears. The child's eyes, wide and terrified, seemed to pierce him before the image vanished. Each time, the sensation of being watched intensified, a heavy, unseen weight settling upon him. His skepticism, once a formidable fortress, began to show cracks. He meticulously documented each occurrence, trying to find a pattern, a logical explanation. He measured air currents, checked for drafts, even investigated the electrical wiring, searching for some mundane source for these phenomena. There was none. The house remained silent, impassive, yet its presence grew, a conscious entity that seemed to breathe around him. One afternoon, while examining old maps of the estate, a vision seized him with terrifying clarity. The air bit at his exposed skin, sharp and unforgiving. In the distance, a figure, small and desperate, stumbled across the ice, their silhouette hunched against the wind. A thin, crystalline shriek, like glass fracturing, echoed across the expanse, followed by a deeper, sickening crack. The figure faltered, then disappeared beneath the splintering surface with a muffled splash. Then, he was back in the study, gasping for air, the scent of stagnant water and frigid air still clinging to his nostrils. He stared at the antique map, his hand trembling. The frozen lake was clearly marked on the estate's boundaries. He knew it existed. To experience its history with such visceral intensity, the air here was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. As he passed a particularly crumbling section of plaster, his eye caught something. Faintly, almost imperceptibly etched into the grime and flaking paint, was a symbol. It was a crudely drawn, asymmetrical knot, 3 interlocking loops that twisted back on themselves, forming no discernible pattern. He had seen it before, in the visions, on the cuff of the woman's dress by the window, on a ring worn by one of the arguing men, on the wooden doll clutched by the weeping child. It was a recurring motif, a silent, sinister signature of the manor's memories. He ran a finger over the faint etching. It was rough to the touch, undeniably physical. It wasn't a trick of the light or a projection. It was there. The house was not merely haunted by echoes. It was actively manifesting its past, pulling him into its suffocating narrative. The manor was not a collection of walls and timbers. It was a living, malevolent repository of suffering, and he was becoming its latest unwilling archivist. The lantern's feeble glow had long since guttered, leaving Marcus in the absolute blackness of the oldest wing. Hours had passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had begun to stretch and compress within the manor's stone embrace. He eventually found his way back to the main halls, a strange lethargy weighing his limbs. The air, thick with the scent of dust and ancient wood, seemed to cling to his skin, a pervasive dampness that seeped into his bones. A gnawing emptiness in his stomach eventually stirred him from a prolonged stupor in the library. He had not eaten properly in days. The thought of fresh air, of the world beyond the manor's oppressive walls, flickered in his mind like a dying ember. He needed supplies. He needed to speak to someone, to hear a voice that wasn't his own echoing in the vast, silent rooms. A residue of his former skepticism lingered, urging him towards action. This house, he told himself, was merely old, merely isolated. Its effect on him was purely psychological, a byproduct of his own solitude. Marcus moved towards the heavy oak front door, his footsteps strangely muted on the worn floorboards. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very air ahead of him thickened into an invisible barrier. His hand reached for the cold iron handle, but then hesitated. A peculiar reluctance settled over him, a deep-seated inertia that felt less like his own fatigue and more like an external pressure. It was not a physical force, but a profound disinclination, a subtle whisper in the periphery of his awareness suggesting that leaving was unnecessary, perhaps even unwise. The outside world, with its demands and distractions, suddenly seemed distant, irrelevant. He retreated, the urge to leave dissipating like smoke. He picked it up, a flicker of resolve returning. He plugged it in, waited for a faint charge, then dialed the familiar number. The call connected, but only a low, persistent static issued from the receiver. He tried again. The same. He tried a colleague, then a general emergency number. Nothing but the ceaseless, sibilant hiss, It wasn't just his phone. The landline in the study yielded the same dead air. Days blurred into a seamless continuum. Marcus found himself neglecting even the most basic needs. His clothes, once neat, became rumpled and stained. He rarely shaved, the rough stubble a constant irritant. Meals were an afterthought. Snatched bites of dry biscuits or stale bread, often forgotten halfway through. His energy, once a steady hum of academic drive, drained away, leaving him feeling perpetually weary, yet unable to truly rest. He drifted from room to room, his purpose unclear, his thoughts unfocused. The manor, in turn, seemed to press in on him, its presence no longer just architectural, but sentient. He felt observed, not by eyes, but by the very fabric of the house itself. The creaks and groans of settling timber, the sighs of wind through unseen cracks, no longer sounded like inanimate processes. They were communications, low murmurs that seemed to resonate deep within his own skull. He began to interpret them, to understand them, not with logic, but with an instinctual primal comprehension. The house wanted him here. It needed him. He was drawn repeatedly to a large window on the second floor, overlooking the estate's grounds. Beyond the skeletal trees, a vast expanse of white gleamed under the perpetual overcast sky. The frozen lake. Its surface, a sheet of milky ice, stretched out toward the distant, indistinct tree line. It was utterly still, utterly silent. No birds landed on its surface. No animal tracks marred its pristine white. It was a possessive entity, drawing him deeper into its core, feeding on his waning will, slowly, imperceptibly. He was no longer fighting it. He was settling into it. The thought of leaving, of breaking free from its embrace, no longer held any appeal. He was here, now, and the house, in its silent, demanding way, had made him its own. He found himself contemplating the manor's history not as an objective researcher, but as one who had become an inextricable part of its unfolding narrative. The lethargy that had settled upon Marcus was not merely physical. He found himself in a hallway, the same stone walls, the same vaulted ceiling, yet something felt subtly wrong. The effort felt like wading through treacle. A door he was certain had been on his left now stood on his right, its heavy oak surface scarred with unfamiliar carvings. He ran a hand over the rough wood, the texture alien beneath his fingertips. He paused, his brow furrowed. Had he simply misremembered? The manor was old, labyrinthine. It was easy to get lost. The corridors seemed to stretch, their perspectives subtly altered, as if viewed through warped glass. A familiar tapestry, depicting a stag hunt, should have been on the wall ahead. Instead, a bare patch of stone, pitted and stained, greeted him. He blinked, rubbing at his eyes. This was not merely the disorientation of fatigue. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp, the biting wind whipping across a vast, flat expanse, the distinct scent of frozen water, the faint groan of ice underfoot. He knew this place, this desolate, beautiful landscape. The sensation vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving him breathless, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had never been to such a place. He was Marcus, a historian, bound to libraries and archives, not vast frozen wastes. The thought was a desperate anchor against a swirling sea of confusion. The need was primal, a desperate attempt to reassert his identity against the encroaching strangeness. He turned a corner, expecting the grand staircase, but found himself facing a dead end, a solid wall of ancient, unyielding stone. This wall had not been here. It was impossible. He knew this manor. He had studied its blueprints, walked its halls countless times since his arrival. Yet here it stood, an insurmountable barrier. He never understood the true nature of the structure. Marcus recoiled, shaking his head violently. Whose thought was that? It was a sentiment he might have had about the original builder, but the phrasing, the specific tone, felt foreign. He turned, retracing his steps, but the corridor behind him now seemed shorter, the archways narrower. He reached a point he recognized as the entrance to the library, the heavy, carved doors unmistakable. He pushed them open, expecting the familiar scent of old paper and leather. The room was immense, cavernous, unlike any he had ever seen in the manor. It was a space that should not exist. He stumbled backwards, his breath catching in his throat. This was not the library. This was somewhere else? Or was it? But who was Marcus if his own recollections were unreliable? He closed his eyes, focusing on his name. Marcus. He repeated it internally, a desperate mantra. But as he opened his eyes, a different name almost formed on his lips. A name that felt strangely familiar, yet utterly wrong. He shook his head again, a desperate, futile gesture. The manor was not merely shifting its physical layout. It was reaching into his mind, rearranging the very architecture of his self. He was lost, utterly and profoundly, in a labyrinth not of stone, but of thought, and the walls were closing in. The air. It was not just cold, but thin, as if essential particles had been siphoned from it, leaving behind a hollow vacuum. It pressed against his eardrums, a muted pressure, and his breath felt inadequate, each inhalation a struggle against an invisible resistance. He tried to recall the precise sequence of events that had led him here, to this specific stretch of corridor. The details blurred, coalesced, then dissolved like smoke. There was a sense of urgency, a pressing need to find something, to understand something. But the what remained stubbornly out of reach. His mind felt like a sieve, important information draining away, leaving only a residue of anxiety. This erosion of his cognitive landscape was more terrifying than any phantom. A low hum began to vibrate through the flagstones beneath his boots, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to originate from the very foundations of the manor. It wasn't a sound heard with his ears, but felt in his bones, a slow, rhythmic pulse that resonated with the unsettling emptiness of the air. He opened his eyes. The walls, usually a uniform gray, seemed to possess a deeper, richer hue in places, like old bloodstains that had been absorbed into the stone. He touched a section, the surface cool and dry, yet beneath his palm, he imagined a faint, almost imperceptible warmth, a slow, internal metabolism. The hum intensified, guiding him, a silent siren song. The walls here were rough-hewn, devoid of the later additions and embellishments, hinting at the manor's true ancient core. He emerged into a cavernous, unheated chamber, its stone floor covered in a fine layer of dust and brittle leaves blown in from some unseen vent. A vast, arched opening, like the mouth of a cave, dominated one wall. Through it, the world outside was a stark tableau of winter. Skeletal trees clawing at a pale sky, and beyond them, the flat, crystalline expanse of a frozen lake. The wind howled across the ice, carrying with it a sound Marcus instinctively recognized as a lament. It was not a natural wind whistle, but a chorus of thin, reedy cries, barely audible, yet profoundly affecting. The frozen lake stretched out, an enormous polished mirror reflecting the gray sky. A local legend, recounted by a colleague during his initial research into the manor's history. The disappearance of a young woman centuries ago during a harsh winter. Her body never found, only a torn shawl near the lake. At the time, he had dismissed it as morbid folklore. The disorientation, the fading recollections, the pervasive lethargy. They were not symptoms of a failing mind, but evidence of an ongoing process. The manor wasn't merely haunted by residual spirits. It was a living, predatory entity. It fed. The revelation struck him with the force of a physical blow, stealing his breath more effectively than the thin air. It consumed memories, not just of its inhabitants, but from the very air, the very stone. It drew in life force, slowly, imperceptibly, until its victims were nothing more than husks. The legends, the disappearances, the subtle decay of historical records related to the manor. It was all a pattern. Each victim, each soul consumed, contributed to its strength, its malevolent vitality. The richer hue in the stone, the faint warmth he had imagined, the deep hum. These were not passive hauntings, but the manifestations of a growing, thriving organism. The cries on the wind were not just the wind. They were echoes, residual fragments of those it had consumed, their despair trapped in its perpetual cycle of sustenance. He was its current, preferred meal. The manor was not just consuming him, it was savoring him, slowly, deliberately, blurring the lines of his past and present, preparing him for the final, irreversible absorption. He would not be swallowed. Not yet. The air, thick and cloying, seemed to press in, not just around Marcus, but within him. It was a suffocating mental fog, a lethargy that blurred the edges of the hallway, rendering the stone walls into an indistinct gray and the vaulted ceiling a distant, unknowable height. He felt himself drifting, the recent terror of the house's shifting geometry fading into a dull ache, a memory he couldn't quite grasp. This was not fatigue. It was an insidious consumption, a silent, pervasive draining of his very will. Then, a sharp, cold splinter of clarity pierced the haze. He remembered the feeling of being watched, judged, fed upon. The house was not merely haunted. It was a predator, and he, Marcus, was its prey. It was a flickering ember, but it was his. He clenched his fists, the nails digging into his palms. It wanted him to become another fading echo within its walls. But a historian, even a skeptical one, was accustomed to sifting through layers of obfuscation, to finding truth beneath legend. This house was a lie, and he would expose it. He pushed off the cold stone wall, his muscles protesting, heavy and unresponsive. Each step was a conscious act of defiance, a struggle against the unseen currents that sought to anchor him. He wasn't just walking, he was resisting. His gaze sharpened, sweeping over the familiar yet subtly altered hallway. He needed a weapon, a defense, something. The house was ancient, its history steeped in malevolence. There had to be a record, a forgotten lore, a way to fight back. His mind, now fiercely focused, raced. The library, the study, the places where knowledge was stored, where truths, however inconvenient, might be hidden. He moved with a renewed, if still leaden purpose. He found the study door, or rather, a study door. Inside, the familiar scent of aged paper and dust was laced with something metallic, something like static electricity before a storm. The room was a jumble of forgotten texts, maps, and artifacts, just as he had left it, yet the chaos felt more deliberate, more alive. He began to search, his movements frantic, methodical. He tore through stacks of ledgers, pulled down volumes from towering shelves, ignoring the cascade of dust that choked the air. He wasn't looking for a ghost story. He was looking for a battle plan. His fingers brushed over leather-bound tomes, their pages brittle with age, until one particular volume caught his attention. It wasn't its size or its title. A nondescript local histories volume. He pulled it free. Inside, the pages were not printed, but filled with a cramped, spidery script, ancient and faded. The language was a dialect he barely recognized, a corrupted form of Old English, laced with obscure Latin phrases and symbols he had only ever seen in rare occult texts. This was not a local history. This was something else entirely. It detailed the slow erosion of sanity, the blurring of time, the ultimate absorption of life force. This wasn't metaphor. It was a clinical description of his experience. He flipped pages, his breath catching in his throat as he stumbled upon a section marked by a faded blood-red ribbon. Here, the script became even more frantic, the symbols more pronounced. It spoke of a desperate attempt to sever the root, to starve the hungry stone. It detailed a ritual, a countermeasure, born of ancient fear and forgotten knowledge. The ritual was complex, involving specific times, specific words, and a specific location. His eyes narrowed, tracing the faded ink. The frozen lake. It was rumored to be bottomless, to hold secrets deeper than its frozen surface. The house, as if sensing his discovery, responded. A low, guttural groan rumbled through the floorboards beneath his feet, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very stone. Marcus clutched the book, its ancient leather warm now in his sweating hands. The house was awake. It knew. And it was angry. But he had found a thread, a single terrifying chance to fight back. The ritual was dangerous. The text implied dire consequences if performed incorrectly. But it offered a glimmer of resistance, a sliver of hope against the overwhelming, consuming entity that was the manor. He had to reach the frozen lake. He stood in the library, the flickering lamplight casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and contract with an unnatural rhythm. A chill that had nothing to do with the manor's pervasive cold seeped into his bones. Marcus turned towards the heavy oak door, intending to retrieve a specific ledger from the study. Then, with a concussive boom that rattled the ancient windows, it slammed shut. Marcus stared at the closed door. The door was now firmly shut, the knob unyielding. He pulled, pushed, even kicked the solid wood. It was as if the frame had fused around it. A low, guttural groan reverberated from the floorboards beneath him, a sound too deep to be structural. It was a sound of immense, slow-moving mass. He felt the tremor beneath his feet, a subtle shift that made him stumble. The air grew heavier, thick with an unseen presence. He directed the torch beam around the library, the familiar shelves now appearing distorted, their contents blurring at the edges. A book, thick and leather-bound, slid from a high shelf and landed with a soft thump, sending up a puff of dust that shimmered in the torchlight. He didn't recognize the title, nor the specific shelf it had fallen from. He was certain it hadn't been there before. The walls seemed to draw inward, the ceiling to press down. He tried another door, one leading to a rarely used servant's passage. This one, too, was sealed. The manor was actively resisting him, its malevolence manifesting in a physical blockade. This wasn't a haunting. It was a siege. A faint, wet scraping sound emanated from the other side, like something being dragged over rough stone. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that whatever was on the other side was not a rat or a settling beam. Determined, Marcus moved through the library, searching for any exit, any path. He found a small, almost hidden door he had never noticed before, tucked behind a massive, dusty tapestry depicting a hunting scene. He pulled it open. Beyond lay not a corridor, but a narrow, winding staircase descending into absolute blackness. He hesitated, then descended, his torch beam barely penetrating the gloom. The stone steps were uneven, slick with a fine film of moisture. He gripped the torch tighter, his knuckles white. It was indistinct, a wavering outline of a tall, gaunt man in antiquated clothing, his face a blurred smear of gray. It raised a translucent hand, its fingers elongated and skeletal, and lunged. Marcus instinctively recoiled, stumbling back against the damp wall. He gasped, a raw, involuntary sound. The figures were not merely visions. They were the house's extensions, its enforcers. He reached the library door, slamming it shut behind him, cutting off the spectral assault. The walls shimmered, and the shelves began to dissolve into swirling vortexes of gray and brown. Marcus watched, horrified, as the room around him transformed. He was no longer in the library, but standing on a windswept, desolate plain under a perpetually twilight sky. The ground was frozen solid, littered with skeletal trees that clawed at the bruised horizon. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and decay. A figure emerged from the swirling mists, a woman in a tattered dress, her hair long and matted. Her eyes, sunken and black, met his. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged, only a silent, agonizing scream that tore at his mind. It was not empathy. It was as if her emotions were being poured directly into his own consciousness. This was a memory, a nightmare made terrifyingly real, designed to break him, to absorb him. The ground beneath him began to crack, long fissures appearing in the frozen earth. It was the frozen lake, but seen from within, from beneath. He understood then. The text had implied the lake was not merely a natural body of water, but a vast frozen repository, a digestive system for the manor's victims, a place where their memories and life force were slowly, agonizingly consumed, becoming fuel for the house. And he was standing on its surface, about to be pulled in. The manor was fighting back, and it was fighting to consume him whole. He clutched the tattered journal, its brittle pages now a roadmap to an impossible destination. Determination, cold and sharp, had replaced the creeping dread. The grand staircase, usually creaking with phantom footsteps, offered only a muffled groan beneath his weight. Now the house seemed to hold its breath, a predator watching its prey approach the snare. He found the hidden passage behind a false wall in the old servants' quarters, a place he had dismissed as a simple storage space. His flashlight beam cut through the absolute black, revealing walls of rough-hewn stone slick with condensation. The passage angled downwards, steeply, then opened into a vast, cavernous space. His breath plumed in white clouds. The space was immense, larger than the house itself should allow, a disorienting vastness that seemed to defy architectural logic. It was a subterranean expanse, the ceiling lost in impenetrable gloom, the floor a chaotic jumble of jagged rocks and shallow pools of black water. A low hum vibrated through the stone, a resonant thrum that Marcus felt in his teeth, his skull, his very core. It was the sound of the house's engine, its metabolism. His light swept across the cavern, catching glints of moisture, the skeletal remains of ancient, collapsed timber. Then he saw it. In the center of the vast chamber, nestled among the rocks, was a circular basin, perhaps 20 feet across. This was it, the frozen lake. A profound stillness emanated from the ice, a quiet that swallowed all other sounds, even the dripping water. Marcus approached cautiously, his boots crunching on loose scree. He knelt, pressing a gloved hand against the surface. He knew with a certainty that transcended logic that this was the house's core. This was where it drew its power, where it held its prisoners. The journal had spoken of a way to unthaw the frozen heart, a process involving a specific sequence of thoughts, of memories, to disrupt the house's hold. It was a perilous, almost suicidal plan, requiring him to offer a piece of his own mind, a specific, potent memory, to shatter the stasis. As he focused, the house responded. A low groan echoed from the unseen ceiling, a sound of immense displeasure. The air around him grew heavy, pressing in, thick with the scent of ozone and decay. The shapes beneath the ice began to coalesce, to sharpen. Faces. They were the house's previous inhabitants, their memories, their very identities, preserved and consumed. They were not merely images. They were impressions of consciousness, radiating a profound collective anguish. Marcus felt a sharp mental jolt, a sudden searing pain in his temples. Join us. You belong here. Rest. They were attempting to pull him in, to add his essence to their frozen tableau. He gripped the journal, its old leather feeling warm and vital in his hand. His plan required him to project a specific memory, one of intense, pure emotion, not of fear, but of profound connection, of love. It was a gamble. The house would try to twist it, to devour it. But if he could project it with enough clarity, enough force, the theory was that it would act as a disruptor, a foreign object in the house's digestive system, forcing it to regurgitate its consumed essence. He pictured a specific afternoon, years ago, a sun-drenched park, the sound of laughter, the warmth of a hand in his. A memory of uncomplicated joy, of genuine human connection. He poured all his will, all his remaining sanity into that single vibrant image, projecting it like a beacon into the frigid depths of the frozen lake. The house recoiled. The hum intensified to a deafening roar, shaking the very stones. Cracks, thin as spider webs, began to snake across the surface of the ice, spreading outwards from the point directly beneath him. A high, keening wail, not of wind but of raw, ancient agony, tore through the cavern. The house was fighting back, its core disturbed, its hunger momentarily overwhelmed by the purity of what he had offered. The confrontation had begun. He felt the mental tendrils of the house lash out, seeking to crush his resolve, to tear the memory from him and consume it whole. The text had been clear, if cryptic, hinting at a truth the manor had long sought to bury. A frigid certainty began to coalesce in his thoughts, cutting through the haze of doubt and manufactured confusion the house ceaselessly spun. This was not a passive entity, it was a predator, and the frozen lake was its heart, or perhaps its Achilles' heel. A low thrum vibrated through the floorboards, a subtle tremor that Marcus felt more in his bones than his feet. The air in the library grew heavy, thick with the scent of decaying paper and something else. A metallic tang, like old blood mixed with the cold dampness of a deep cave. He traced the words again, his finger hovering over the faded ink. The passages spoke of a stillness, a mirror of eternity, and a depth that draws all light. It was not just a body of water. It was the nexus, the true reservoir of the manor's insatiable hunger. Marcus felt the house pressing in, a slow, deliberate squeeze against his skull. He gripped the edge of the heavy oak table, his knuckles white. The thought was a beacon, cutting through the psychological assault. The house would resist. It would twist and distort. But the path, he intuited, lay beyond the familiar, beneath the surface. The sudden absence of light was a physical blow, yet it also sharpened his other senses. Navigating the house felt like wading through thick water. The grand staircase, usually solid and imposing, seemed to shift under his weight, each step a test of balance. He moved with a grim determination, fueled by the desperate knowledge that this was his only chance. His mind, though battered, clung to the image of the frozen lake, an anchor in the storm of the house's influence. He found the entrance to the old cellar not in the kitchen, as the blueprints suggested, but behind a loose panel in the scullery wall, concealed by generations of grime. The wood groaned as he forced it open, revealing a narrow, uneven stone staircase spiraling downwards into absolute blackness. This was it. The house didn't want him here. The very air seemed to thicken, pressing against his lungs, making each breath a ragged effort. The steps were slick with moisture, and a faint, rhythmic drip echoed from below. The house was trying to disorient him, to make him lose his footing, to turn his back. His hand scraped against the rough stone wall, guiding him. The sound of dripping water grew louder, joined by a faint, resonant hum. At the bottom, the space opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. Marcus's breath plumed before him in the gloom. He stretched out a hand, feeling the solid, unyielding surface before him. It was not water, not exactly. It was a sheet of obsidian-like ice, vast and black, reflecting no light, absorbing everything. This was the frozen lake. The hum intensified, vibrating through the ice, up through his feet, and into his skull. He felt the house's presence here, concentrated and immense, a silent, ravenous intelligence. It was feeding, he realized, drawing sustenance from the ground, from the very air, from the memories and lives it had consumed over centuries. Marcus knelt, placing both hands flat on the surface of the frozen lake. He understood patterns, connections, the way things were built, and, crucially, how they could be unmade. The house drew its power from absorption, from a porous boundary between itself and its inhabitants. To fight it, he had to be equally absolute, equally unyielding. He pushed back, not with force, but with an act of pure mental severance. He pictured the shard of ice in his mind, growing, sharpening, becoming an impenetrable barrier. He willed himself to be separate, distinct, no longer a potential memory or a draining life force, but an impenetrable singularity. He focused on the lake, not as a source of power, but as a point of vulnerability, a place where its vast, diffused consciousness was concentrated. He imagined the ice cracking, not from physical force, but from the sheer, unyielding will of a single, determined mind. A high, keening sound, not quite a scream, but a deep, resonant shriek echoed through the chamber. It was the house, a raw, primal cry of pain and outrage. The ice beneath Marcus's hands vibrated violently, a tremor that shook the entire foundation. He felt a searing pain rip through his own mind, as if the house was trying to tear itself from him, or him from itself. The air became charged, thick with an unseen energy. He held fast, his body rigid, his mind a fortress. When he finally pulled his hands away, the pain receded, leaving a profound emptiness. The hum had vanished. He looked down at the black ice. It was not a physical crack, but a tear in the fabric of its existence. A wound inflicted not by a tool, but by an unyielding refusal to yield. Marcus pushed himself to his feet, his limbs heavy, his mind strangely clear yet profoundly altered. The house around him felt different. Subdued, wounded. But he had severed something, inflicted a devastating metaphysical injury. He ascended the stone steps, each movement an effort, but no longer hindered by the house's active resistance. He emerged into the scullery, the moonlight now painting the grimy walls in pale silver. He looked around, a profound weariness settling over him. He was no longer just Marcus, the historian. He was a man who had stared into the heart of a malevolent entity and pushed back. He had not escaped entirely, for the mark of the frozen lake, the echo of its wound, was now etched into his own being.